Our kids are getting acquainted. Yeah, I'm glad you're here. Okay, was like, I only wanted to hear All right, good morning. So Mark was talking about how excited he was that it was cold out, and I have to tell you that we have a tankless water heater, and it has, I heard it back there, did you hear that gasp? Okay, so we have a tankless water heater, and the problem with tankless water heaters is that they have sensors that go to the pipe that goes outside, and when it gets really cold, it shuts off. So this morning we had no hot water. But thankfully, I've read all the Laura Ingalls Wilder books, and I knew that I could heat up water and I could wash that way. So you can wash your hair in a bowl of water, heat it in the microwave. I did not have to go out and collect snow, so that was pretty good on that front. We have cold water, but yeah, right? So there you go. No, so anyway, always a fun adventure to live in Wisconsin this time of year. Anyway, I'm Sarah Gibson. I have been off and on part of the leadership team here at Door Creek Church, not as an employee, but as a volunteer, part of the board, part of different small groups and ministries. And I get the privilege of talking to you today about finding your voice as a leader. What does that look like? And how do we help others on our groups and our teams find their voice? What does that look like? And how do we give them voice in our leading? So that's our game plan for today. I want you to think about someone that you know that every time they speak, it's like this. Okay, the heavens open and angels sing like, oh, right? It's got this whole chorus going on. Everything they say is golden. And I want you to think about like how you feel in that moment, because I think we all know someone like that. And I know when I hear those people in my life, like I can feel my body like shrink up in that process and just think, oh, why would I add anything to the conversation? Because what I have to say is not that important. And I feel just a little bit smaller when I'm with that person. And we all know people like that. And it's a challenge for each of us in this process, because even though we know fundamentally, and we believe fundamentally that everyone's voice matters, we sometimes question, we sometimes add the tagline, except my voice. Like everyone's voice matters, except my voice. And if we feel that as leaders, can you imagine that people on our teams and the groups that we lead, how they feel in that process? Because anytime you're given a voice of leadership, your voice is amplified. It's like stepping up on the stage. It's like having a megaphone, and what you say becomes even more important and louder to people. And if we feel that way as leaders, and we feel like our voice doesn't matter at times, there are people in our groups that feel like, oh, like Sarah just spoke, or Debbie just spoke, and like, what do I have to add to this conversation? So we're going to talk today about how do we give voice to people in this process so that we all can shine like that previous picture, like everybody's voice is heard in an equal way. So that's our game plan. We're going to talk very specifically about why all voices matter, ways we might quiet other people's voices, and ways we can give voice to other people on the teams that we lead. So that is our game plan. Let's start with the why. Why do our voices matter? And I'm going to give you examples for each of these as we go through this process. Our voice matters because our voice changes the conversation. And for those of you who are note takers, I love that. There's also a handout with kind of a quick summary. So you're welcome to that, but take whatever notes you need to. So our voice matters because our voice changes the conversation. Our voice is required, needed, and wanted in healthy organizations and healthy teams. We need everybody's voices. And then we each bring something unique to the conversation. So those are going to be kind of our three principles that we flesh out in the course of our hour together. So if you don't believe that our voice matters, I want you to think about these three corporate examples. These are examples where people's voices were silenced in the corporate world, whether it be Uber or Wells Fargo or Volkswagen. They have gone through a series of scandals and events where people have said, actually, we don't want to hear your voice. We don't want to hear that what we're asking you to do is wrong or unethical or illegal in this process. And as a result, they've faced a lot of consequences as organizations. We face consequences as individuals when we do those same things to people's voices. We want to make sure that we're avoiding that process. So let's talk about some people that have given us examples of each of these principles. So there's a gentleman named Bonhoeffer. How many of you have run into to Bonhoeffer? A couple of you. Lots of you. Awesome. So Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a pastor in World War II Germany. And his history is fascinating. His experiences are amazing, what he went through. He was asked to join the Nazi church, and there were a group of German pastors that said, no, what you're asking us to do and what you're preaching is not biblical. We don't believe in that. And so they became kind of part of this resistance group. He had the opportunity to go to America. He went to America. He spent a couple of years in America and went, my voice is needed back in Germany. Because he knew that his voice would change the conversation. He would have the ability to speak into situations that other people could not speak into. He returned to Germany. He became part of an assassination plot to kill Hitler, was ultimately arrested for that assassination attempt and put in a concentration camp. 2 weeks prior to the camp's liberation, he was executed as part of that. And you're like, Sarah, that's not a happy story. It's not a happy story. But Bonhoeffer's legacy actually lives on. Bonhoeffer societies exist all over the world, asking really hard questions about our faith, our ethics, and how it all plays out across all that we do. And so it's a really fascinating story because Bonhoeffer really believed, and I don't think he set out to say, hey, I'm going to become someone in history, but he believed that everybody's voice changes the conversation, and he knew fundamentally that to not speak is to speak and to not act is to act. He didn't actually say those words, but they were written about him as a summary of who he was. And so oftentimes when we don't give our voice as a leader, or we don't give voice to people on our teams, we're missing an opportunity to have different conversations than we may have had. So I want you to think about people in your lives that have changed how you have conversations with other people. Maybe something that they did or something that they said that changed how you approach life. So you got somebody pictured in your head? Somebody who did that? For me, it was Mike and Char Hayes. We were in college, and Mike and Char Hayes were pastors of our church. And every Sunday, they had all of the InterVarsity students over for lunch after church. So they had 20 of us descend on their house every single week because they believed every college kid should have a home-cooked meal once a week. They were fantastic and amazing people. Mike passed away last year. I just saw Char about 2 weeks ago. She's a second mom to me in many ways. And one of the things that they taught us, one of the things that they said and spoke into our life was about generosity. So we were college kids, super poor. We got married in college. We had this car that was just a junker. We had beaters where I grew up, right? Anybody grew up with beaters? Yeah, right, beater car. So I grew up with this, we had this poor, rotten car, and my husband had a job interview across the state, and they gave their car to us for the day to travel to do that interview. Sounds so simple, right? I had never seen that demonstrated. I'd never seen that modeled by anybody because I grew up in a household where it's mine, right? It's mine. So Mike and Char taught us through their voice that we live with open hands as much as possible, right? What we own is not ours. It's ours to serve with and ours to give in that process. So we had people in our lives that are like Bonhoeffer that contribute something really unique to us that changes our conversation. We as leaders change people's conversations in how we lead. So that's going to be one of our lessons today. The next person I want to talk about is CEO of Kimberly-Clark, Tom Falk. And Tom Falk had this really horrific job where he had to go to his board of directors and explain the marketing strategy of all things, of tampons, to his marketing board. Can you imagine any men in the room going, I want that job, right? I don't know of any men that volunteer for that. But that's what he needed to do. He had to go explain this marketing strategy for tampons to his board of directors. Then he had somebody from his board of directors come up to him and say, why don't you have a woman present that information? It would be a lot more credible coming from a female if we had representation there in this process. And Tom Falk went back to his leadership team and started looking at it and examining it and found that only 19% of leaders at Kimberly-Clark were female. And most of them were not in the upper levels of leadership. And he went, this isn't okay. This isn't working for us. We're missing something here. We're missing voices in this conversation. So what he did is he actually tied pay for performance goals and all kinds of metrics to bringing more women into the organization, more diversity into the organization across the board. And they're up to about 43% women in leadership there. They have seen skyrocketing of their sales, and their stocks have doubled underneath his leadership. So there's financial pieces to this, but more importantly, there are voices that he recognized and said, that's missing for us. So I want you to think about a time that either you've had to speak into somebody's life and say something hard to them, or where they've said something hard to you that you needed to hear. And if you're willing to, at your table, share one or two of those stories, and we'll regroup in 3-4 minutes. So one of those two scenarios. Those hiccups.
So cute.
Can I have them during break?
Are your hands washed?
No, I promise that I... Well, they're recent.
To listen, I'm really good with That's almost talking and see, like, oh, you know that. I just learned to listen. And sometimes that changes, my voice and things.
Yeah, he just ran outside.
Don't need to be scared of going out.
That's a difficult thing at work. You know, when you have a problem with somebody, go to that person. Well, this person goes to my boss all the time. So it has nothing to do with my boss. So I got to get some. Just again. It's like, you know, healthy boundaries are coming to the person before you go to the boss when there's problems, and not just flesh. It doesn't help our relationship at all.
I know it cuts to my mind, and I just came from trust change the game. Very good at about something that she might be scared of. And do you know her on a personal level?
We've gotten better.
And I was like, hey, how you're like, okay, how do you Is it possible she just three different personalities. But does your boss tell her to go back and talk to you?
I had a conversation with my boss saying that I would like to give her a
Yeah, that is a tough one. Well, maybe this will help us somewhere. Voice to everyone who leaves.
Sometimes it's hard to take. Just yesterday. I don't know why. I woke up and just snapping. Silas snapped at his brother, and I was like, why are you talking to me like that? I know! That's not true. But like, in that moment, but we talked later, it's better, but he is hard.
But it's okay to look.
All right, 30 seconds, finish up.
Didn't act appropriate, like,
Oh, for sure.
yeah. I used to be like, no, I'm going to time out. Yeah.
All right, finish up. Here we go. So it's interesting. I think we all have stories where somebody has spoken into our life and had to say something hard to us. And maybe question like, oh, do you have all the voices that you need in your life? Or we've had to speak into other people's lives. And it can be challenging. I've been on both receiving and giving. On the receiving end, I've had people tell me things like, Sarah, you are so overwhelming. As a leader, right? I am, okay, thanks. And it's true, right? I think that there's things that we know about ourselves, but sometimes we don't realize how we impact other people. And oftentimes those voices that speak into our lives are the ones that are saying, hey, here's just a quick check on this. I want you to be better at what you do. And so we have those voices, but I've also had to be the voice of like the hard conversation that says, wow, like I don't think that that's biblical behavior in a group. And to say, this isn't okay for us as a group. And they're just hard things to say, but I think that there are lessons for us. Like if we don't do that, we're not healthy as an organization. We're not healthy as a small group. We're not healthy as a ministry in that process. So being aware that we have some power in how we use our voice and how we receive other people's voices is important. So that's the lesson from Tom Falk. The last lesson about we each bring something unique to the conversation, I'm going to talk about Susan Cain and her book Quiet. Some of you are like, oh yeah, I've read this. Who's read or listened to it? Okay, several of you. If you have not, it's a fantastic book. And what I love about this book, it's about the power of introverts in an extroverted world. And we value extroverts who think aloud, but there are a lot of people in our groups that are introverts. And as an extrovert, I was not aware of a lot of the ways that introverts think. And I am the only extrovert in a household of 4. All the rest are introverts. And not just a little bit, like a lot of it introverted. And that's okay, but it's challenging. Like for me to realize as a parent that my kids need the entire weekend to regroup was a whole new concept. Because like by 9 a.m. Saturday, I'm ready to do something, right? We've been quiet for an hour, let's go. And they're not at all that. They're super like, hey, like don't even talk to me until like 3 p.m. right, on that front. So this book was really eye-opening to me. And Susan Cain brought a perspective that I would have never had I not actually been exposed to that. So I think that we each bring something really unique to the conversations around us. And it looks a variety of different ways for each of us. But we have to be aware that there's perspectives that I don't have. As a white American woman, there are perspectives I don't have for people of different backgrounds. As an American, there's a perspective that I have that other countries don't have. There's so many dynamics and so many different pieces. I need other people's perspective to know what's different in their lives and how we can approach things together in this process. So those are 3 principles. So our voice changes the conversation. Healthy organizations, healthy ministries need everybody's voice, and we each bring something unique to the conversation. Those are our main principles. So what's the impact of our voice as a leader? If you just think about in general what our voice does as a leader, what are some things that come to mind? There's some things, yeah, Beth.
It can either make people desire to share, like if you breed vulnerability, sharing from your own life, then it will breed vulnerability. But
Yeah.
if you kind of have this like mask of, oh, I'm okay, nothing, I don't have any issues, then you're going to breed the being fake, basically.
Yeah. People want to know that you're vulnerable. You can breed trust in a group by being vulnerable as a leader in that process. I was talking to somebody right before this, and she was saying, I remember pulling up to church one time, and Wayne, what is Wayne's last name? I'm going blank. Rockwell, thank you. The Rockwell van pulled in, and Wayne used to be our youth minister, and like she heard screaming from the van prior to church. She's like, oh, they're normal. And so she went up to Wayne and said, thank you for that little tiny glimpse. We need that to build trust. Like we're all human, but if we feel like as a leader, I have to be super amazing and impressive, we never build that trust, that vulnerability. What's another impact of our voice?
Can be very authoritative.
Yes. Yeah. I kind of overheard a little bit of what your group was saying over there. Like sometimes there are voices that are super authoritative and people just shut down. They walk away in that process. So we have to be aware that that's a possibility. Good. Other ways we can impact based on our voice.
You can intimidate people without knowing it or intending to do so.
Right. Most of the time we don't intend to do so, but we can intimidate them just accidentally in that process. Yeah, good, thank you. What else? Yeah, sorry.
How can be passionate and encourage people to sort of invest more?
Right. So we can actually be encouragers in this process. So our impact can be negative, and the impact of our voice can be really positive and encourage people.
And through engagement.
Yeah, yep, absolutely. Thank you, Ken. So through that engagement piece of things, by hearing from their voices.
I think when we are leaders, it's not so much what the impact is, it's a recognition that no matter what, there is going to be an impact.
Yes.
And it could either be positive or negative.
Right.
Because you're in a leadership role.
Absolutely, Brett. So there, regardless of whether we want there to be an impact, there is, and is it going to be positive or negative, we do get to control some of those factors, or we can work on some of those factors in that process. Absolutely. We have an impact, yeah.
The
Dan?
voice of a single leader reflects back on everything that they're connected to. So
Yes.
racially, organizationally,
Yeah.
everything. So our voices in this room reflect back on Door Creek.
Mm-hmm.
As a white male, it reflects back on white males, everything that I'm connected to. When I speak, it reflects back to all of those connections.
Yeah, yeah, and I love that point, Dan, because we don't think about how powerful our voice is as a leader. That one thing that we say, just it's like those ripples. It affects everything. They're like, oh, well, if he says that, and I found out that he went to Door Creek and he's a leader there, that means Door Creek is this. Like, it impacts us in lots of different ways. We have power as leaders, and we don't always think about how much that is. And I don't want it to be intimidating, because it can be scary. Like, I'm never going to lead again. But at the same time, I have to be aware that there's some skills that go into this. So we'll get to the skill part too. All right, so we do have an impact. As leaders, we have some things that we can tactically do, or like think about very strategically in ways that we can quiet other people's voices or give voice to other people. What are some ways we shut people down? Let me rephrase that. So what are some ways we shut people down? Accidentally most of the time, right? Yeah, Bree.
Well, if someone tells us a story, then we are thinking about our own story and jump right into
Right.
our own story.
So we're not listening to their story. What we're doing is we're listening on the side like, but I've got a great story, right? And then we share our story and we minimize their story. Good, yeah.
I'm in sales,
Yeah.
and when I'm talking with the customer, sometimes they're really sharing something, and I'm thinking about what I'm going to say, and I may step over what they're saying just to get my point out,
Right.
and not really encouraging them to, really, not showing them how important what they have to say is.
Yeah, we minimize their importance by jumping in ahead of time and also like telling them, here's actually what you should be thinking. Let me tell you what you should be thinking. Yeah, good.
Anytime we're doing something that is not engaging, disengaging, disenfranchising.
So tell me more about that, Ken. What are some of those things that are disengaging and disfranchising?
Talking over, not learning somebody's name, not focusing, not giving your focus and attention
looking
to
at
what
your
you
phone.
say.
Looking at your phone, yes, Bev.
That was it.
She's looking
Calendar while they're trying to tell you something.
Right, all those pieces. Yeah, Marcia.
When people wore watches, looking at your watch or looking at the clock,
Yes.
eye contact, you're like,
They're done with me.
Super hard in our society where we're kind of ADHD and like, oh, like, what time is it? Like, I check my phone, I have to do this. Yeah, Beth.
I think when you, I remember a conversation with a friend and I was sharing something I struggled with, and she had a really judgmental response.
Okay, so
So
I've
then
been
I'm like, okay, I won't talk to her about this anymore.
Yeah,
You know?
Beth shared something very vulnerable, and then that person had a very judgmental response, and like instantaneously, like, I'm done. Like,
The wall is there.
it's there. Aaron, you had one.
Just times when we interrupt within the context of conversation, or when we discredit people outside of conversation. So if their voice, there's like this already preconceived notion about what they say doesn't matter or it's not credible.
Yep, absolutely. And as you were saying that, Aaron, I was thinking about discrediting people just inside conversations. You don't mean to do things. And I do a lot of work around generational pieces, and my husband and I were talking about something, not realizing our daughter was listening. And it was one of those conversations that she came back later and she's like, is that what you really think? I'm like, actually, it was really just a conversation point. Like, our generation grew up believing that. And I'm not saying it was right or wrong, but we were talking about it in that context. And it really shut down a series of conversations that we had had with her. She's like, well, clearly you think this. Well, no, it was out of context, but still gave the impression. Yeah. There are things that we do that we accidentally quiet other people's voices, and there are times when you might want to be purposeful about quieting somebody's voice. You have a dominator in the group, and you're like, actually, we've got to figure out how to moderate that. But we really want to focus on how do we give voice to other people? What does that look like in this process? So we're going to talk about two things, style and skill. Our style is really about kind of our innate wiring and how we're built. So we're in here, Bev talked about this, like we all have different gifts in the body. And as believers, we're like, hey, this is what I bring, this is what you bring in this process. We have to be aware that our style very much impacts how we lead. Our style impacts how we lead. So I want you to write down 2 to 3 words that describe you or that you've heard about yourself on a regular basis. 2 to 3 words. That's your task.
Honestly, it's
All right, everybody got, for the most part, a couple of words down there? All right, who's willing to share 1 or 2 of those words? Yeah, let's hear it. All right.
Childish and easygoing.
Okay, childish and easygoing. Both have gifts and both have curses.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, right? So on the gift side of childish, like, hey, it's just fun, it's engaging, it's fresh, it's innovative. On the negative side, people are like, oh, it's childish. Can you just grow up, right? We hear both sides. Yeah. Yep, absolutely. Good. Anyone else willing to share? Dan.
Analytical and fixer.
Okay. I've seen you fix things, right?
I'm trying to.
Right? So analytical and fixer. So analytical can be positive and analytical can be negative in this process. So you'll laugh with the water heater today. My husband said, I wrote up a process for how to do this the other, and I'm like, why? I would never look at a process, right? We have processes in our house. So it's a gift, right? But on the flip side, it can be a frustration. Yeah, good. Anybody else? Yeah, Ken.
Passionate, hard, and fair.
Okay, passionate,
Hard.
hard, and fair. That's what I want to make sure. Okay, when you teach, passionate, hard, and fair. So they can be positive, like people feel like everybody's got an equal shot, they know where they stand. On the negative side, there's, especially on that hard side of things, like he's not going to give me a break. Yeah. Yeah. Good. So all of these things come into play in our leadership, and here's how it ties in. I'm going to use a word that I often am described as, which is driven. Driven is a perception. It's kind of a culmination of behaviors that I do. I want you to be thinking about those words that you wrote down about yourself. What drives that perception? For me, some of the things that I do that make people think that I'm driven is that I accomplish a lot. I move quickly, I act on decisions, I make decisive statements, and I ask strategic questions. Those are not right or wrong in and of themselves, but driven to me may look very different than driven to somebody else, and I can be very overwhelming in that process. So when I take these words that I use to describe me and I break them down into what behaviors happen to create that perception, I can start to moderate my behavior. I can say in a small group, accomplishing a lot might be fantastic, but if there's no relationship and no trust in that small group, I haven't actually done my job as a leader. So I have to balance always those two concepts. I have to know what behaviors I need to amp up and what behaviors I need to turn down in this process. Just because I act on a decision doesn't mean that my group is with me. The ministry team that I'm leading doesn't mean that they buy into it. I can be 5 months down the road going, yeah, we're accomplishing, and I look back and nobody agrees with me, right? There's nobody on my team that has traveled with me into that process. So there are behaviors that drive our perceptions, and those behaviors are things that we can moderate. So that's one of the ways we can give voice to other people is by thinking about what are my behaviors that might accidentally shut people down? What are some of those things? So those are behaviors. Then there's a skill component. As we get into the skills, it's always fun. So 3 skills we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about building trust, communicating in a way that people can hear, and then using language that's easy on the ears. Those are 3 things that we're going to talk about as far as skills go. It is not enough to know my style. I have to be able to moderate that to make it feasible for other people to hear it. So let's think about building trust. What are some things we do as leaders to build trust? What are some things we do as leaders?
Be vulnerable.
Yeah, be vulnerable. We've heard that already. Thank you, Erin. That's good. Yeah.
Sharing like your testimony.
So sharing your faith and your story, your testimony.
Be hospitable. So
Yeah.
you open your doors, and as soon as people come in, you make them feel like your house is their house.
Yeah, as much as possible. My house, your
Get a
house.
drink.
Yep, get your own drink.
There's
This is
the
where the
cups.
dishwasher is. Right?
Make
It's
yourself
good.
at home.
It's good. Is it Steve, right?
I think open, build that open,
Oh, thank you.
make it open for every people to share their opinions.
Okay, okay.
Ask them, what do you think, and get them involved.
I think that's really good. So we want to make it possible for people to share their opinions. And here's one of the things that leaders often do that will shut people's voices down. They give their opinion first. How many of us have been in meetings or rooms where the leader says something and then gives their opinion first, and everybody feels like, now I have to follow that opinion? That's a classic thing that we all do. Good. Did I see another? Yeah, 2 other signs. Let's go, John. We'll circle. John first.
It goes with hospitable,
Yeah.
building relationships, just meeting them wherever they're at, and just showing that it's more than just you, like, I'm leading, you're following,
Yeah. So it's about relationship, creating a sense of you're part of this in this process. Ken, you had one, then we'll go to
I think it's important when you engage somebody to actually try to draw out what it is that where their interests are, and show interest in what they're interested in.
Yeah.
Validates, so validating.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've all met people that as they start asking us about our hobbies or the things that we like to do, and it's instantly engaging in that process. And it's a moment where we go, yeah, I'm connected to that person. RJ, you had one.
Going like hand in hand with being real is just like being vulnerable, being willing to like take in the opinions that they give. And
Right.
Like not being like, no, you can't do that.
No, I like that, right? No comes with a hand gesture. Did you see it? No. It's good. It's good. Yeah, there is a piece, though, of being open to it. So when we hear hard things about ourselves as leaders, there's a principle I apply. Is it truth and is it trash, right? So what from this is truth and what is trash? And the reason I do that is anytime you're in ministry, there's going to be trash coming at you. It's just going to happen in that process. And you have to sort out, like, what's actually true here? Because there's probably pieces that we have to hear, but then separating out the stuff that you really don't need to hear. Is that actually true or not? I do this for a living. I facilitate conferences and sessions and all that sort of thing. And there's always one eval that says this was the most terrible thing I've ever been at, right? Always, right? And when it's that one thing, I have to go, what's truth and what's trash? If 99 people loved it and one person hated it, there may be a piece in there I need to pay attention to. There's a truth grain, what was it? But most part, it's probably trash. So that's, I think, just a good principle for us. Good, there's a hand over here, Marcia.
We have to watch our nonverbals.
Okay.
It's not just what we say. We may be saying one thing, but our nonverbals are like, not necessarily that obvious, but
right.
you know what I'm saying.
She gave this great eye roll for those of you who didn't see it, right?
And I'm known for the eye roll, and I have to watch that.
Right.
Because I'm what they call a guest service person at Quick Trip.
Yeah.
So this one lady was being really, really.
Yeah.
And I was saying one thing, but I rolled my. You rolled your eyes.
I didn't mean to roll my eyes, but I did. I love it. That's a moment of vulnerability right there. That's good. Brett, did you have one? Is that your?
Oh, I was just consistency.
Yes.
People will, especially if you're in a leadership role, people are, in some cases, they're looking for you to not practice what you preach or be consistent with what you're saying.
Yep. So that consistency factor and also following up, just like the actual follow-up, like say you're going to do something, do it. Yep. All of those things are part of consistency.
I wanted to add one more thing because this actually happened.
Yeah.
Is, we're human. And I think it's really important. We're going to make mistakes even in leadership.
Yeah.
And I had this one student, and I said something I shouldn't have said, and then I came and followed up and I apologized. I said to her, I said, that was wrong. Being vulnerable, being willing to admit you were wrong goes a long way.
Building trust and calling out yourself in that front and admitting it and apologizing is huge. I love that. Karina, you had one?
Yes, I think if you're a leader and you're canceling a lot or showing up late all the time, you're not you're listening to everybody else.
Yeah, so there's a sense that sometimes some of us are just really super overscheduled, and that's not a good thing. It shows people that we don't actually prioritize them, or if we're canceling a lot, all those fronts. Yeah, Bev.
Just made me think of what when she was saying that it's that criticize in private
and compliment in
Yep.
public.
Yep. Criticize in private, compliment or praise in public on that front of things. And think about hard conversations shouldn't happen necessarily in front of a whole group. Should be one-on-one on that front. It's not always easy. Debbie?
Piggybacking on that, I was thinking about trust is also saying what you do what you say, following through.
Yeah.
If you tell them that you're going to do something,
Yep.
to do it. Otherwise, you kind of lose all your credibility.
Very quickly, right? That integrity. Be who you say you are, do what you're going to say you're going to do. Yep.
Along that same lines is he was saying on vulnerability, be willing to say, hey, I committed to this, but I didn't do it. I'm sorry.
Yep.
I'll try to do better next time.
Yep. Owning your mistakes in that process.
Because we're going to fall short. We're
Totally.
going to fail at times, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Moment by moment. Yeah.
Would you say like looking in the mirror with that person while also looking out the window, in a sense, like holding each other accountable, but also holding the things they do outside of where the thing is accountable?
Sure. So having a relationship one-on-one, and it's like mirroring to one another what's going on, and then there are times like I actually have to look at the bigger picture of how this happens too. Is that a good summary, RJ? Yeah. I heard. Oh, go ahead, Erin.
Oh, one thing we talk about a lot, actually just here at Door Creek, is having your team's back, especially toward the outside world or even other teams. But then, in my business background, we call it, avoiding those triangular conversations where you're actually taking a conflict to that person rather than just talking about it with a bunch of other people. And so, when you can avoid that, then obviously it builds more trust on your team.
I love that. Erin. So instead of triangulating a challenge or a hard conversation, going straight to that person, creating an environment where you can do that, super important. Super important. Yeah, there's lots of ways to build trust. I'm going to talk about 3 of them, and we've highlighted some of them to some degree. I think taking time to build trust, John, you mentioned this. Like, it takes time to build relationship, and anytime you are in a small group or you're leading a ministry or any of those things, it takes time to build trust and investing in time. And I am a task person, generally, like, hey, I'm going to get stuff done, it's going to be great. But relationship takes time, and I have to put the task aside to build relationship, and I have to be purposeful about that. So it's not wrong to be task-oriented, but you have to be aware it doesn't necessarily complete trust with everybody. Choose your battles wisely, but choose your battles. There are things that as leaders we have to overlook, and I'm not saying overlook something unbiblical or overlook something that is way off the charts, but I am saying there are some things you're like, really, does that particular piece matter? And knowing what that is as a leader can be really hard to do. So we're going to talk about a tool in a little bit for sorting out when should I pick a battle and when should I not. One of the best sets of parenting advice I had was from a friend who said, say yes as often as you can. And then when you say no, it's much easier in that process because you don't say no to everything. You've said yes to as much as you can. So in a leadership role, say yes. If somebody wants to lead a potluck or a get-together, but it's maybe not how you would design it, say yes, right? Let them take care of that piece of things. Let them set it up. As long as it's not wrong, let them run with it. Another friend of mine is a leader, and I love this. He talks about for every decision you have to make as a team, there's probably 10 options. And let's just say there's 10 options. The bottom 3 suck. They're terrible, right? You shouldn't choose those. But all the rest of them are pretty good. The top 3 are what you're shooting for. As long as somebody on the group that you're leading picks one of the top 7, don't pick the battle. But if it's one of the bottom 3, then you speak into it and say, nope, that's not okay. And for me, that's been helpful to release things. Because I hey, this is how we do it. Actually, you always set the table this way. Does it really matter? No, it doesn't. I have to pick those battles. So choose battles, choose them wisely. And I think another way we can build trust is we can value and affirm each other's, especially the abilities and gifts somebody brings to our team in the hard moments. So when somebody says something in a really difficult conversation, I want to acknowledge not only what they said, thank you for speaking up in that process, but here's why I needed your voice. I needed your voice because you created a process and procedure around it that I never would have, right? I needed your voice because you bring this perspective to the conversation. So those are some ways that we can build trust. And it's an hour session, so these are really high level. So, but gives you some ideas. This is one of my favorite slides of all times. I love this graphic. We need to communicate in a way that can be heard. And even this woman's shirt just vibrates, doesn't it? You're like, whoa! we all know people that when they communicate, it's like this resonance, right? We hear this noise or we see this visual, and it's just painful in how they communicate. We have to communicate in a way that other people can hear. So I'm going to pick on my son Kyle, who is delightful, amazing, many, many fantastic things. He is one of the nicest young men. He's also inherited my dad's ability for tact, which is 0. Okay, so that's the challenge. That's the challenge. So we went over to some friends' houses, and he was helping them like rearrange their gaming console. And he pulls out a piece of equipment, and he says, "Wow, it's really dusty. You should dust more often." Right? Right? So communicating, but not in a way that's heard on that front. We all do that. We all communicate in ways that maybe are not heard by other people. So I want you to think about your natural style, what you bring to the table, and how it can be received positively and potentially negatively. So we looked at those words that you described yourself with and said, here's the positive, here's the potential negative on those fronts. We all have those moments. We all have those things that we need to think about how we say it and how the other person is perceiving it. I have one woman that is in a Bible study with me right now. She's very quiet. She is very reserved. She's a thinker, so everything is processed before it's put out. I'm an out loud thinker in that process. So I have to give her space to be thinking about things. I have to intentionally slow down how quickly I speak. Not because she's unintelligent, but because she wants to process it and needs to process it in a different way than I do. So we're always trying to figure out, like, in different situations, what do I need to adapt and adjust in that front? All right, so we need to communicate in a way that other people can hear. And to us, our voice might sound really candid and straightforward. It might sound like we're exploring possibilities and ideas. It might sound like we're harmonious peacemakers or maybe thoughtfully analytic. But our voice heard to other people might be this. Instead of candid and straightforward, we're rude. Instead of exploring possibilities and ideas, we come across as heretics who are saying all kinds of crazy things. Instead of being harmonious peacemakers, we might be doormats who never take a stand. That might be the perception. Instead of being thoughtfully analytical, we're naysayers who miss the point, right? So we have all of these perspectives, and we have to realize that when we communicate, how we communicate to us may not sound the same way to somebody else. It may not sound that way. Dan's taking a picture. That's like the epitome, right?
You've arrived.
All right, so let's talk about using language that's easy on the ears. We've got about 10 minutes left or so. This is kind of the tactical side of things. So we want to communicate with empathy. Empathy always wins, right? Anytime you can acknowledge somebody where they're at and say, hey, Robin, it sounds like it's been a really tough week. I'm sorry you're there. That's very different than saying, hey, Robin, let me fix that problem for you. Empathy will take you a long ways, just acknowledging a hard spot. One of the things that I've grown to learn very quickly, thankfully, is that anything that somebody else is in, any mess somebody else is in, I could just as easily be in that mess. And that makes me realize, like, hey, I don't really have a spot to judge you in this because it could have been me just as easily as it could have been you in that process. So communicating with empathy. A tool for picking battles and figuring out which battles to pick is CPR. This is from Crucial Conversations, for those of you who've either read or heard the book. CPR stands for Content, Pattern, Relationship. CPR, Content, Pattern, Relationship. I figure out if it's a battle if I need to pick. If it is content level, if it's something like I'm just going to meet somebody once, I'm never going to see them again, I'm probably not going to pick the battle. It's kind of a content piece. If it's something where I think this content, what happened just now, is going to bother me, it's going to become a pattern in our relationship, then I know I have to go back and address it. Because if I don't address it, it's going to impact the relationship negatively. For example, I'm trying to think of a good example. In my small group, I have somebody who speaks up a lot. And they're just a talker. That's okay. That's not a problem. But if it's a pattern week after week, and I realize that it's shutting down other people in the group, it's going to impact not only my relationship with that person, but with the entire group. So that's when I know I need to address something. And as you start using this pattern a little bit more, you're like, oh yeah, it's going to be a content piece for me, so I need to address that. It's going to impact our relationship. I need to address that now. But it gives me a framework for figuring out, do I pick this battle or do I let it go? Is it just a content, not a big deal? Or is it a pattern that impacts our relationship? So that's that piece. Bless you. And then here's a couple other tools. Don't do statements. That's also from Crucial Conversations. I love this tool. I don't want to make you think that I don't want to hear that opinion. I do want to make sure we explore all options. I don't want to get lost in the details of this conversation. I do want to keep us on track. I don't want to dismiss that as an important topic, but I do want to make sure that we've done our research behind it. So I use don't do comments a lot of times to balance out and validate somebody, but also give permission for a different perspective. And it gives my intent. It shows my intent in that conversation. So don't and do. The other tool that's helpful is yes and. It's an improv tool that just keeps building on things. And this tool is really good at diffusing people who are upset. So we had a street repair a couple of years ago. We have a cul-de-sac behind our house, and I parked our car on the cul-de-sac late at night. I looked at the house. There was a driveway. I'm like, oh, I'm good. I didn't realize it was a duplex, and I was blocking the other driveway. So the next morning, I came out, and there's this note on the windshield that says, what the, right? I'm like, whoa! And lots of expletives that I should never share. But there's all these words, and I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like, this is I don't like that kind of conflict. All right, here we do. So I go up to the door, I knock on the door, this guy answers, I'm so sorry, I parked in front of your driveway last night. I didn't mean to. It was dark when I came home. I could have had your car towed. They told me I should call the police. My friends, blah, blah, blah. Yes, and I'm so glad that you didn't do that. Yes, and I'm so glad, right? Like I kept repeating this yes and phrase, and at the end of the conversation, he's like, I want to be mad at you, but I don't know how. So it was fantastic. So it's a great tool because it acknowledges somebody else's perspective and it allows you to contribute your side of that perspective. So people feel validated, and there's the and piece. So it's a great tool. And I think the last thing that is just language that's easy on the ears is assuming the best, when I assume the best. I also have a 15-year-old daughter. I always have to pick on kids equally. Grace is not known for saying things at 15, right, that are always the best, because you're 15. We're all there. Yeah, and in that process, the other day she said something to me, and I said, I'm going to assume this is how you meant to say that. It's not what I heard, but I'm going to assume that this is what you meant. Oh, yeah, it's totally what I meant. She didn't mean it offensively. It just came across as really offensive. And by even just saying that phrase, it opened the door for me to not be angry in that situation, because I could have gotten angry very easily. So assuming the best is another tool. All right, here's your assignment, because I've been talking a lot. I want you, there's note cards at your table, there's colored ones, there's white ones. I want you to take 2 note cards. I want you to take one, and I want you to write down a note, just reminding yourself about how you can give voice to everybody you lead. And the second one, I want you to take a card and thank somebody for the voice that they've had in your life. So that's going to take you about 5 minutes, and I'll wrap us up. have time to finish up at the end, for those of you wrapping things up. So how can you give voice to others that you lead? What were some things you jotted down on that thought? Some ways you can give voice to others.
To listen.
Yeah, thank you. It's Kimberly, right? Make sure I got that. Kimberly, thank you. Just to listen more. Good. Hannah. Oh, that was not Hannah. She moved, but
I think asking questions, especially, there's always people in the group that just don't share as much, and so particularly, hey, what do you think about that?
Right.
Just so that they have a chance to answer, and because sometimes people can be intimidated and not feel like they can jump in.
Yeah, being very specific about asking people to join the conversation, but also asking them to join in a way that makes sense to them. Not say, so what do you think about Romans 8, whatever, and they're like, whoa, that's a hard one. But giving them time to process ahead of time and then inviting them in. I think that's important. Good. Anything else? How can we give voice? Terry.
I think, starting a new group, fixing to start a new group.
Yeah.
And, just setting out the ground rules, going over the covenant, and then just on a regular basis, kind of reiterating that, hey, we're here to hear each other's thoughts and opinions and really knock down any fear or judgment that people may, like you just saying with trust, we got to build that trust where people feel comfortable to share what they think.
Excellent. Love that. Marcia.
Kind of twofold, to validate that I hear what you're saying, validate, because feelings are...
They're real.
They're real.
Feelings are real, yeah.
And if they have a question about something, let's stop and have some discussion about it.
Yeah.
Not whether we get through the lesson.
Yep.
And so be more process-oriented than result-oriented.
Yes, yes. You and I, Marcia, right? We've got to give ourselves permission to vary from the agenda.
Right.
For sure. That's good. There's lots of ways we can give voice to other people on our teams, the folks that we lead. So just a quick reminder, the 3 things that we're focusing on is that our voice changes the conversation. Healthy organizations, healthy ministries, healthy small groups need and want everybody's voice. Not just need, but need and want. And that we each bring something unique to the conversation. Because all of us fundamentally believe that everyone's voice matters, and instead of saying, except mine, we want to focus on everyone's voice matters, including mine, and everyone I lead. So thanks for letting me share my voice with you today. I appreciate that. Thanks for being here, and thanks for leading. So finish up your tasks if you want to, your cards and all that, but other than that, I think we're done for the day, aren't we? Yeah? All right. Have a good one. All right.